Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this web conference. This is Michael Gutter from the University of Florida, and on behalf of the Financial Security for All Community of Practice with the Extension, I want to thank you all for joining us today as we talk about family financial recovery from a natural disaster. Today, the University of Minnesota Extension and North Dakota State University Extension Service invite you to a webinar where we're going to showcase two new resources, the E-Extension Money Management in Times of Disaster web resource and Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit. As always, of course, as most of you know, at no time in U.S. history has there been such a far-reaching occurrence of significant natural disasters, from, of course, the oil spill technological disaster here in Florida to the many storms and such that have been ravaging our country. These disasters wreak havoc on the financial well-being of those in their path, and family financial recovery is really a long-term process, and decisions made at the time of a natural disaster really affect the financial well-being of survivors for a lifetime. So we look forward to sharing this information with you today. Of course, we have excellent presenters. We have Phyllis Onstad, Lori Sharmer, and Sarah Kroymans. Just a reminder before we begin that any questions that you have should be entered into the chat window, and we'll do our best to make sure that we get to those in a timely manner, typically at any natural pause in the conversation. And as always, there'll be some time at the end for some question and answer going forward. At this time, though, it's my distinct pleasure to, of course, introduce our first speaker. Phyllis is an extension educator with the University of Missouri Extension Center for Family Development. She received her BS from the U of M and attained a Master's of Adult Education there as well. She's an AFC and has worked with the U of M Extension for 20-plus years. Currently, she's been involved with Minnesota colleagues in a research project with disaster survivors 2 years post-disaster to learn about their recovery stories, what was helpful, what was not, and the tools that were needed to help assist them. This extension research project was actually the impetus for the development of Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit that we'll be talking about today. In the fall of 2010, she and other Minnesota extension educators worked in area disaster recovery centers to pilot this toolkit. Her husband, Dan, is experienced as a volunteer coordinator for disaster rebuild operations, and her sister is a disaster case manager. And of course, she enjoys growing up with her grandchildren and gardening. So it's my distinct pleasure to turn this over to Phyllis. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. We'd like you to just look at this slide that's up one more time and see what kind of information that we need from you, your complete name, email address, university or agency, and include that in the chat box. And if you are looking for CEUs because you are an accredited financial counselor, please put the letters AFC after your name. Michael, would you like to take us through a couple of polls?
That would be my distinct pleasure. Okay, so please take the time to respond to this poll. I'm going to actually post up the second one if that's okay as well.
That would be great. Interestingly, we see that most of the people on the webinar today are from Extension, Cooperative Extension, with some other members of the community that are from the nonprofit organizations or government organizations and military. We find that most of you have had some experience with a natural disaster in your area, including 72.6% in the last 3 years. And in the last 6 months, close to half of you have had experience with the multiple disasters we are experiencing at this time, including the recent flooding of the Missouri River that runs through many states, and also the forest fires that's impacting 5 states at this time. Thank you for your polling. Okay. Michael, can you close the polls, please, and we'll move forward.
Are you done with the poll questions?
We are.
Okay.
We'd like to continue with the outline for today's webinar. You'll learn about the 2 new free online resources that Michael mentioned, and we will also ask you to complete a brief online webinar evaluation or survey. And we do have an optional learning experience for some of you who want to stay online. Louisiana Extension has requested that we include an overview of disaster recovery resource fairs, a community strategy to provide access and reduce barriers to disaster program assistance. In some of the disaster-stricken areas, agencies are finding it difficult to reach those who need assistance most, and disaster survivors may not be able to access assistance because of multiple challenges. So at the end of this webinar at 2:30, there'll be a 10-minute break, and those of you that would like to stay on the webinar can come back. And you do not need to log in again, just stay on, and from 2:40 to 3 p.m. we will talk about that. At this time, I would like to introduce Lori Sharmer, who began working with the North Dakota State University Extension Service in 2001. Her area of emphasis is family economics, and she is based out of Minot, North Dakota in Ward County. Last week, she was providing disaster education in the Minot area as 10,000 residents had been evacuated because of the 3rd flood crest they have experienced this spring. Lori has a Master's of Science degree in Family Financial Planning, is an accredited financial counselor, and a member of the E-Extension Financial Security for All community of practice. She has been instrumental in the development of the new Extension Money Management in Times of Disaster online resource, and will showcase that resource for us at this time.
Thank you, Phyllis. It has been kind of a wild week in my town, but I'm glad to tell you that I think the dikes are going to hold and we're going to be safe. A good teachable moment. Well, working with this project on family recovering financially after a disaster, we had a definite connection with E-Extension and the Financial Security for All community of practice. We have most on the line are extension professionals, and so are probably fairly aware of E-Extension and what they have to offer, but just in case there are a few that aren't, let me just give you a quick overview. E-Extension is an online collaborative among the state extension services across the nation, bringing the land-grant universities together in an online environment. E-Extension is an interactive online learning environment delivering the best, most researched knowledge for from the smartest land-grant university minds across America. E-Extension was launched in 2008 and offers a national internet-based education network which complements the community-based extension system with 24/7 availability for consumers, which is what they want. Many of the ways Extension provides resources, they have articles, bank of frequently asked questions. They have an Ask the Expert tool for consumers to ask and pose questions. They have self-paced learning modules, calendar of event, and then also online learning opportunities similar to this webinar. It is a great resource for consumers. Now, I have another poll for you. If Michael can bring up the next poll question, we'd like to just have a feel for how many of you are familiar with eextension.org, how many of you have used it, or if you're just not aware of it at all. Just trying to get some feedback from our audience. Interesting results. We have most of you are familiar with it and have used it. A few that are familiar but have not used it, and just a very few who are not familiar with the extension. Okay, I think we can close the poll. Thank you for your feedback. The information on the eExtension website is organized within communities of interest, subject areas, and then they develop a community of practice. And I think you're all fairly familiar with that. At the heart of eExtension are those community of practice, groups of extension professionals, researchers, industry professionals, and others interested in a given subject area. The community of practice then represents a variety of institutions, disciplines, multidisciplinary, and they are open, fluid, and flexible as they evolve over time to address the needs of a community of interest. Each community of practice brings together articles, publications, news, training, blogs, events, frequently asked questions in their subject area, and then posts those online at eextension.org. The community of practice also supplies experts to answer questions through the Ask the Expert tool. I believe there are now 60 community of practice groups within eExtension, and in our list of files that you can download is a fact sheet on community of practice, which will give you a list of the number of community of practice subject areas. Now, the Financial Security for All community of practice was an inaugural community of practice when eExtension was launched. And it addresses personal and family finances with information and education. This is a screenshot of the home page for eExtension.org with the web address shown at the top. The topics on this page are constantly changing and current. They're kind of like a news feed. Notice in the upper left-hand corner, it shows the logo of the land-grant university that serves your state. So when you log on, you will see your land-grant university logo. We promote eExtension as an information site with access to the land-grant university system, and it is a go-to site for reliable information for consumers. But research has also shown that most people reach eExtension website through a search engine similar to Google or Bing. But once they're there, they have that best of the best information available to them. You'll notice in the lower right-hand corner is the the Ask the Expert icon. When a consumer does not find the answer that they're looking for, they can ask an expert and get a response within 24 hours. And a recent study showed that 56% of the people using Ask the Expert have never heard of cooperative extension. So this does mean we are reaching and engaging a whole new audience for extension through our Ask the Expert. This is a screenshot of the Personal Finance or the Financial Security for All Community of Practice webpage. For our project that we've been working on, a page was created titled Money Management in Times of Disaster. And you can see that listed among the other topics for the Community of Practice page. The Money Management in Times of Disaster page is a portal to store a wide range of resources from across the land-grant university system addressing personal finances in the face of disaster. The resources are organized under preparation, and then we also have resources under returning to your damaged home, and then finally the managing finances and making decisions after a disaster. As you can imagine, there are a great number of extension resources dealing with disasters. The resources listed here were chosen because they address the financial needs of those preparing for or recovering from a disaster. Here's a screenshot of the Money Management in Times of Disaster page. It highlights where the resources are stored under preparation and recovery. This is where one can access these resources, although we also know that people can access the resources through a search from any search engine. And again, we want to reiterate that these resources are the best of the best. They're developed through research by extension professionals across the country. They're peer-reviewed, they're current, and they're up-to-date. Here's a screenshot of one of the resources that we have posted. Some of the other items that we have posted are replacing very important papers, 6 steps to making an insurance claim, budgeting your finances after a disaster, having a family disaster plan, and creating a grab-and-go box. Just a wide variety of resources pulled together in this one place. The cornerstone resource for the money management in times of disaster is this toolkit that you're going to be hearing more about, the Recovery After a Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit. This is the resource to help individuals and families to financially recover after a disaster. The other resources complement this toolkit, so it's a very good fit between the resources available and this toolkit that has been developed. The toolkit was designed from the very beginning to be very accessible, and you'll be learning more about the great resources, but we wanted you to know where you can access it. The first option is you can go directly to the University of Minnesota Extension website. It's under their Tough Times webpage, and you can click on and get right to that resource in a PDF file format. You can also access the toolkit through the e-extension Money Management in Times of Disaster webpage. And you may also want to link it to your home webpage, making it easy for your consumers to access it. Now this screenshot will show you a picture of the University of Minnesota Extension's webpage, and it highlights where you can click on and see the complete toolkit. Now you can download the program, you can work with it online, or you can print it off and put it into a binder, your choice. Then the toolkit itself is broken into units, and you may not want to download the whole unit, so you can choose to just download the units that are applicable to you, or the units that you need to help a consumer. So made to be very usable. You know, you can have the whole toolkit, you can have pieces of the toolkit, or even just download tools that are created. Here is a screenshot of the Money Management in Times of Disaster showing where the toolkit can be accessed through e-extension. And again, that link will take you to the file that is stored on University of Minnesota. They will house the actual file and keep it up to date as needed. So the toolkit was designed to be usable, meaning that it's broken into units and you use the whole thing or the parts that you need. It was also designed to be consumable. It has very helpful tools designed to be used that can help a family walk through this recovery process. And it was also designed to be accessible, meaning that it is online, available to all, free of charge, and available at any time. All you need is internet access. So do we have any questions about e-extension or accessing the toolkit? Trish, have you run across any questions on the chat box?
Yeah, Carl and I have been chatting back and forth and wondering about if it's available in its printed form. And the answer is no, it's available in PDF for folks to print at their own, at their location. Or what I was sharing on the chat is that we have partnered with community agencies who have chosen to print off for their clientele. For instance, it's in sections, and as you get into the toolkit further, you'll see the different sections. Sometimes the first section might be appropriate at the time of disaster and not the other two. So it's very flexible in how you print it off.
I noticed that Becky Koch put a note in the chat that NDSU is selling it. We're not really selling it. We're just saying that we will print it at that cost. We know that if you were to take it to a commercial printer, to have the whole thing printed is fairly expensive. And so for North Dakota, anyway, we are offering to print it for the cost of printing. Any other questions?
Again, this is Trish. Let me answer Barb's question from Iowa. We were very fortunate in Minnesota and North Dakota to get a Smith-Lever Special Needs Grant that funded the development of this toolkit. Therefore, in that development, we also made resource lists for Minnesota and North Dakota as an extra unit for our toolkit. We encourage other states to develop their own toolkits, perhaps using ours as templates, but then linking to the web link for the toolkit so that we can maintain the toolkit, but other states can maintain their own resource list.
Other questions? Well, I'm now going to turn the webinar over back to Phyllis. Phyllis has worked tirelessly on this project for the past 2 years to bring this toolkit together, and I think you're going to find it is an outstanding resource for disaster survivors. So, Phyllis, take it away.
Phyllis, just in case you have a mute on, we're not hearing you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, and we'll move forward here. I see you're filling out the poll, which is exactly what we wanted you to do. We want to find out who in the audience has experience working with families on financial recovery. Some of you have hands-on experience, others do not. Although the toolkit is designed to be used by disaster survivors and those who will work with them on long-term financial recovery, it is important that you know the depth and breadth of the toolkit, as you may be the friend, relative, volunteer, or professional that can help survivors access the toolkit and refer them to resources included in the toolkit. Thank you, Michael. You can take the poll off. Another poll question. Do you currently have effective financial tools to assist individuals and families in their financial recovery? Please take a moment to respond. We can close the poll at this time, and I want to thank you for your responses. They indicate a need and an opportunity to add to your repertoire of tools and financial recovery strategies. Now for the story behind the toolkit. Once upon a time, there was a major flood that inundated communities in several counties. Yes, seriously. Flooding happened like it has happened many times before in many other places. However, 2 years after the 2007 floods in southeast Minnesota, in the year 2009, Extension educators interviewed disaster survivors to hear their disaster recovery stories. We listened as they shared their stories. What worked? What did not work? What they wish they had known, and what they would like to tell other disaster survivors. We also looked at the current literature on family financial recovery best practices and found a scarcity of information and few hands-on tools or financial recovery guides to follow. We also found research showing disaster survivors reported a long-term financial recovery process of 5+ years. When individual families do not recover, communities also struggle to recover. The flood-prone Red River provides a border between Minnesota and North Dakota. The two states applied for a joint grant from the National Institute for Food and Agriculture to develop a family financial toolkit to be utilized by disaster survivors and those that help them in their recovery process. Additionally, in Minnesota and North Dakota, we conducted focus groups with voluntary organizations active in disaster, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and many others, plus local agencies that have experience working with survivors in long-term recovery. Their input also helped inform the content and the layout of the toolkit. Over and over, they asked us to chunk the information, to have not too many words on a page, to have checklists and worksheets. Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota disaster case managers were utilized as consultants to provide a reality check. And we also piloted the toolkit with survivors of a flood event. Additionally, as you will find on page 2 of the toolkit, we have national reviewers, such as the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the Small Business Administration, who reviewed the toolkit for accuracy and relevance. And now for the rest of the story. Many of you have downloaded the toolkit utilizing the URL provided in the webinar promotion. We will guide you through the toolkit in a show and tell manner. If you did not download the toolkit, you will still be able to follow along, as we have provided screenshots as examples. Time does not allow us to cover all the information in the toolkit. However, you will be introduced to the variety of tools, worksheets, resources, and strategies. Please notice the question format. It is a way to help survivors identify information they may want and need. There are 9 units, as seen in this slide. Let's start with Unit 1. When you put together a little red wagon that you bought for your child or grandchild, you go to your toolbox and you find the tools you'll need to put the wagon together. You do not use all your tools, and only the tools you'll need for that project. Everyone's financial recovery is unique. No one will use all the tools in the toolkit, but many tools are available to choose from depending on your situation. In Unit 1, we recommend that you review the table of contents and pick and choose what you want to work on. Note that in the Securing Housing section of the toolkit, there are 2 separate units, one for renters and one for homeowners. We do suggest that the survivor does not try to complete too much at one time. And throughout the toolkit, we identify people who can help the survivor complete the tools or can provide guidance. Additionally, a family, the youngers, are used as an example, and you will see how the youngers use the tools provided. This family experienced a tornado disaster. They have 3 young children, and Mrs. Younger lost her income because the convenience store she was working at was also destroyed. When you empty a box of puzzle pieces on a table, you see many pieces of varying shapes, colors, and sizes. Some will even need to be turned over to see what they look like. You know the puzzle will be a challenge and will take time, but you know you can complete it because you've solved puzzles before, and sometimes you had the help of others. After a disaster, you often do not have a clear picture of what life will look like when all the financial pieces are in place, because you don't have that picture on the box to go by. You can think about putting the financial pieces of your life together in much the same way you would approach solving a puzzle. The difference is you have never had to tackle this type of puzzle before, so you will begin to see there are many pieces: your pre-existing financial situation, unmet needs, availability of resources, or unavailability of resources. This toolkit will help survivors examine various pieces one by one, to determine if it fits their financial recovery, where it fits, and what it would mean for their financial future. Units 2 and 3 in the toolkit address 10 key strategies for financial recovery, as identified by disaster survivors and those who work with them on long-term financial recovery. These are the things they said they wish they would have known before they began. These strategies are important to know from the get-go. Unit 2, pages 13 through 30 outline the key strategies, and Unit 3 contains the tools needed to implement the key strategies. The table of contents, again, where we send people to look to see what it is they want to learn about. And the first key strategy is the importance of documenting important details. The more accurate and detailed records are, the more expenses that are tracked, the more money will be reimbursed, whether it's for insurance purposes, tax loss purposes, or assistance needed. In the documenting important details, we have 4 tools. You can see them listed on this slide and the pages where you can find them. The first one is documenting important details. Now, remember, people may have lost their home due to a tornado or a fire. They no longer have their office, their computer, a desk. And so they will need to start gathering important details and conversations, as it will be hard to remember all of the dates and times and actions that need to be taken. Having a place to list tasks that need to be done and who will do it and when can help the entire family organize around the tasks at hand and begin to see their progress on their road to recovery. There will be many new disaster-related contacts and phone calls to make. Having one list or an envelope that you keep all business cards in will be helpful. Okay, it looks like we're needing help with the It seems that slides are not progressing.
Okay, this is Jeannie. What slide did you want up?
Hello, we need to be on slide 37.
And what is on slide 37?
Let's see. Let me see if I can get back to that. We'll move forward to obtain accurate information. And obtaining accurate information is the key word here. And you'll find in this unit information on where people can find accurate information that they will need, as rumors will be plentiful. And many people are relocated out of the community, so they'll need to find someone who will be their source of accurate information. Another key strategy is to take care of yourself. And of course, one's mental, physical, and spiritual well-being will have a direct impact on a survivor's financial well-being. And a disaster forces rapid changes in one's life. So we've included in the toolkit a place to journal, and we've called it Resilience, Bounce Back, and Adapt. And it's a journal that survivors can turn to get concrete tips on how to bounce back and adapt during a crisis. Another really strong concern of disaster survivors are how are their kids going? How are they doing, excuse me. And so we have included a checklist of 13 helpful tips to help children cope. Okay, this slide must not have loaded correctly. Accepting financial help. Disaster survivors reported that although it was difficult to seek out financial help in the beginning, it was one of the things that made an impact on their recovery. And so we encourage disaster survivors in this particular strategy to go ahead and ask for help and receive assistance. They probably have paid tax dollars for such programs that are disaster related and may have made contributions. So now is the time to let these disaster programs work for them. We want, the disaster survivors said, we want others to think of it as a hand up and not a hand out. Another strategy that is crucial in the 10 strategies is to engage a case manager to work with you. Financial recovery is difficult and complicated. Not all disasters will have disaster case managers, but when they do, survivors need to understand the role of case managers and the fact that most information regarding disaster resources available and the new resources coming into a community will be knowledge case managers will have. If they know what the survivor's unmet needs are, they can help advocate for those resources on behalf of the survivor. I'm assuming someone's working on getting these slides back up, but let's move forward. When there is no disaster case manager, the information, tools, and resources in this toolkit become even more important, as it helps the disaster survivor become their own advocate and to find disaster recovery resources. Obtaining assistance from a long-term recovery committee. Many of you may not have heard of a long-term recovery committee. It is a group of community leaders and agencies that represent the community and everyone in it. And what they do is take charge of their community's recovery. And they strengthen area-wide disaster coordination. They raise money and disaster donations. And they help prevent the duplications of benefits. And they keep the story and needs of the community alive so that new contributions continue to flow into the community. A very important strategy or form of assistance that may be in a community that disaster survivors will want to know about. Working with financial professionals, I talked about finding people who will help you complete the tools in the toolkit. This can include case managers, friends, family members, and any of a variety of financial professionals. I'm just going to check at this time. Am I still on?
Yes, you still are on.
Okay.
You're just fine.
It looks like some of either your slides have come out blank or they're not advancing, but it looks like we are on Work with Financial Professionals, and we are seeing the screen again.
Are you also seeing the PowerPoint?
We are seeing the PowerPoint, or I am, and we're loading it up on yet another machine to triple check.
Great, thank you. Let me talk a bit about financial professionals. We have extension agents that have background in family resource management. Some have accredited financial counselor accreditation or accredited financial counselor, financial planner accreditation. These can be key individuals, but also your banker. And you need to contact your mortgage lender right away, because many disaster survivors find that they're not only paying a mortgage payment, but they're also now needing to rent. And a foreclosure prevention counselor may be very helpful to them in helping them make a workout agreement with their lender. Using helpers. There's much to do, and many hands will make a difference. People need to look towards the people who are close to them, family members and friends. Also groups they belong to, such as coworkers or your bowling team or your professional association. People with connections to government, whether it's the mayor or the county commissioner or your state and national representatives, who can leverage additional dollars coming into the community. And with that in mind, we have a tool, and it has proven to be very effective. We have a story about a family with young children, and they filled out this form, and that's found on page 57 and 58, and they wrote down what it was that people could do to help and what kind of equipment was needed and possible people who would help. And they gave it to a coworker who was unaffected by the disaster, and that coworker was able to leverage other coworkers at the workplace, and they were able to address the various needs that were listed of what they needed help with. Although this webinar and the toolkit has a focus on individuals and families, our 10th strategy is to let people know about available assistance for small business and agriculture. If your business or ag operation was affected, it will impact your financial recovery. And on page 30, you will find a list of both financial and business recovery agencies that you can work with at the same time to help restore your business or your farm enterprise. Okay, where do I start? Unit 4. People are really anxious to get started on their financial recovery. And they can take steps in the first hours and days, even though they may not be able to go back to their home for several days due to safety concerns. The toolkit includes a checklist of actions to take once you've been able to return to your home that have financial ramifications. And again, before you begin to clean up, there are several financial issues to address, including the careful documentation of damage and property lost. I'm glad that most of you have a copy of the toolkit in front of you. On pages 61 through 65, we find information and checklists of what people can do early in the first hours and days, even before they go back to their home, when they return to their home, and planning for cleanup. We have a variety of tools in this section: documenting loss and damaged property, found on pages 66 to 69, replacing important papers, found on pages 70 to 73, and information about IRS disaster assistance in a federally declared disaster area. I wanted to share with you one tool, and that's the documentation tool. We have an example of how it can be used to document your property and your loss. This is a really nice tool because it has just the information that they will need to give for disaster assistance and also for tax purposes, and to show and prove to those that need that proof what they have lost. And then on pages 66 to 69, they have some forms they can get started with. And we recommend that a disaster survivor find several people who can help them and team up. One person describes the property, the other person writes down the model number, or the other identifying information. And then once that's all gathered, the disaster survivor can fill in the column about the amount of damage incurred. So at this point, we've covered the key strategies and some of the first things to do to start on your financial recovery. Trish, are there any questions in the chat box that we need to address?
Unfortunately, the chat is focused more on the technology aspect, so hopefully we can move on now to, if we have the technology solved, to questions on the toolkit, but there's none right now.
Thank you, Trish. I appreciate everyone who's working on getting us up and running. At this time, I would like to introduce you to Sarah Kroymans, who will guide us through the understanding finances and securing housing units of the toolkit. Sarah has been an educator with the University of Minnesota Extension since 1992. She obtained a Master's of Education from the University of Minnesota and has been an accredited financial counselor for 12 years. She is committed to assisting individuals in developing critical financial capability skills. She is a key contributor to the development of the tools in this toolkit. Sarah.
Phyllis, thank you. I was able to log back in, and I can now see slides. So if you do not see slides, log back in. But that means then that I've lost my ability to forward slides. So I'm not sure if someone can help me with that. All right, so this is Sarah. I will try to talk a little bit louder. And I was able to log back in and see my slides. So if you are not able to see slides, I suggest that you log back in. But that also means that I've lost the ability to forward slides. So I'm not sure if someone is able to help me with that ability.
Yeah, Sarah, just let me know. This is Mike Gutter. I should be able to.
Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide then. Thank you, Michael. All right, so where am I financially? It is really important for folks to understand their current financial situation in any type of setting so that we are able to make informed decisions. But anytime that a family or an individual experiences a disaster, it is even more vital to know where they are financially prior to the disaster, and then what implication does that have for themselves now that the disaster has occurred. As Phyllis spoke earlier, it is so important to obtain financial help from professionals as folks are making those decisions. And definitely throughout the disaster and the recovery process, the financial picture is going to change for folks, especially as different resources become available. If the disaster has been federally or state declared, other resources will be available. And if the community does have a long-term recovery committee that is able to garner resources for the community, additional items may become available. So the opportunities and the financial picture changes throughout. Now, as Phyllis also mentioned, we have the Sam and Joan Younger family in the toolkit. And for all of the resources and the tools that we provide, Sam and Joan have completed those forms. And so those serve as an example for folks on how the forms might be filled out. But we do want to emphasize that the examples are for Sam and Joan, and they are not appropriate for everyone. Everyone's picture is individual and unique, and so we want folks to fill those out individually to see what's appropriate for their family. Now also in this next section there are several financial worksheets and forms that many of you are probably very familiar with, but we encourage you to go through and work with those individually. Fill them out for yourselves so you are comfortable and confident in using them prior to working with folks and in completing them. We'll go to the next slide now. Thanks, Michael. All right, so summarizing the financial situation. For some folks, they don't like to look at their financial situation. And so depending upon what their picture looked like prior to the disaster, it could cause that anguish and that anger because chances are their financial picture becomes much more complicated after the disaster. Often folks find that they may not have enough resources to move forward quickly and get back on one's feet quickly or in the way that they really want to. But it is important that folks explore resources, assistance, and options, and that they look for all of those opportunities. Definitely families need to be creative and look for a variety of resources, from food support to volunteers, to that volunteer help in moving forward with housing and different things. So important to look at those items. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so those of you that have the toolkit in front of you, starting on page 77 is where we assess the financial situation. And you'll see the list here of 5 different tools and resources that we're going to look at in more detail. Next slide. All right, so first we have assessing the monthly income and expenses, the standard monthly spending plan and budget form or budget form. Now you'll notice the print on the screen is pretty small, but there is space for folks to figure out income and expenses prior to the disaster, and then the current income and expenses once the disaster has occurred. And then there is space for them to track income and expenses for 3 months. And they could photocopy this to carry the family throughout several months. But this provides an opportunity to really track where they are at and to make adjustments and changes as necessary. As Phyllis indicated earlier as well, it is really wise to save receipts as they are going throughout this process, because those could be really necessary as they look for reimbursement and tax purposes and that type of thing. Next slide, please. We move on to the net worth statement. And as folks know, this is really a snapshot of current value of financial holdings, assets, take away liabilities, gives us our net worth. And again, this gives folks vital information necessary when they are making decisions about what they're going to do after the disaster. So does their situation allow them to leverage more money? Are they able to qualify for loans to rebuild their home? It also helps them look at their assets. What assets might they consider selling? Also, it can help them really think about what are the consequences of cashing in long-term assets. You know, the retirement funds and those long-term assets are pretty important for the future. And so we really want people to think long and hard before they jump and cash in some of those things that they might regret later, because there are definitely consequences in the long term with that. So this net worth statement, pretty standard form that folks are familiar with, will really help folks collect information that will be useful as they make decisions. Next slide, please. All right, can I afford another payment? And oftentimes that's the big question. Can I take on another mortgage? Can I take out a loan to repair my home? Can I take out a loan to get another car because my other vehicle was damaged or totaled in the disaster? And so this form again helps folks walk through, might I be able to afford another payment? And so it's a debt to gross monthly income ratio. Very simple again, and step 5 there helps them do that comparison and where are they sitting. And again, this is one more tool that they can use as they're making decisions about where to move forward to. Next slide, please. The credit report. Oftentimes in a disaster, paperwork in the house is destroyed, and so oftentimes folks don't have a lot of records available to them. And so requesting a copy of a credit report is a great way to collect information on what were my debts and what was that lender's name and address and phone number. And so it's a great way to collect all of that information. So important for folks to know where they are currently. And as we all know, folks can qualify for a free credit report one time per year at annualcreditreport.com. This section of the booklet also provides a sample letter if they want to dispute information in their credit report, and gives a nice listing of things to do to maintain or improve their credit report. Next slide, please. All right, so what is my current financial situation post-disaster? By the time we get to this piece of the book, it is time to summarize all the information. So you can see the sections on this first page of this worksheet, the monthly budget and spending plan, the net worth, the debt to gross monthly income ratio. Here we summarize where we are at, and so this collects all of that information in one place. So when folks are making decisions, or maybe they're going into the banker or a lender, and they'll have all of their information in one place. Folks may feel more empowered when they are organized and are able to walk in with necessary information that they know those folks will be wanting. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to pause here. Trish, have we had any questions?
I've been typing as fast as I can. There's lots, as extension educators will always do, they jump to application and thinking about how this tool could be used in educational programming. And so that is really exciting. Lots of folks talking about wondering at this point if the tools are interactive, and they are not, but we're hoping that we can move that, either the online tools to be interactive, or part of the grant, NDSU is working on some apps for mobile devices, and we don't quite know what that will look like, but when we have them, we will share them with the folks on this listserv. I do like that folks are looking at the application and really thinking, of course, about prevention or preparation. And anytime we can utilize these tools in a preventative mode, it would be much better than at the time of disaster.
Definitely, definitely. The prevention piece, the proactive piece is so important. So thank you for summarizing those, Trish.
Yep.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, too, just one final comment that came in right as Trish was talking. Does anyone have a comment? And Trish, you kind of mentioned this a little bit, that, you know, for when families are directly affected, you know, is there a time that's too early to offer this information?
And Phyllis, maybe you want to chime in. There are pieces of this that are really appropriate almost shortly after, especially the inventory and the listing and the journaling. Sometimes it could be a little overwhelming, you know, too much information. What's hard is that if you give them one piece, how do you get back to them to get the other pieces? That's the challenge that we find. I don't think there is too early a time, but we do find that people have a hard time consuming all of it at once. And so either telling them really only deal with this section now, or giving them, if you have a long-term, like a case manager may meet them many times in a period of time, then they could give it to them over time. But if you're only going to see them once, I'd probably err in more is better than less.
Well, the nice thing is that the document is in a 3-ring binder as well, so they can look at the pieces that are appropriate at that time and go back later. And as we all know, families and individuals process things differently, and some will be ready earlier than others. All right, other comments before we move forward with Unit 6 here? All right. Well, if the home is damaged, it is definitely important for folks to make some decisions. Where am I going to live? You know, that's one of our basic needs. But this is a opportune time to have folks step back and really assess their personal decision before making quick decisions on, my house was damaged, we're going to fix it, and we're going to get back into the home. But now is a good time for folks to step back and say, wow, you know, what now? Do we really want to get back into this home? Maybe it is an elderly couple, and maybe moving into an apartment or that next stage in life is more important. Or maybe it's a young family, and the parent, one of the parents, works in a neighboring town because of a job shift. Now would be a time to step back and say, oh, maybe we should move to the next town because that would be closer to work, and we would save gasoline and do different things. So that the object here is to really have people think through all of the options and opportunities and the alternatives, going through that basic decision-making model rather than jumping into the action piece. And I think the general population is real similar to us extension folks. Give me the action piece. Just hand me the hammer. Let's get back in the home. But is that the best thing for us? So let's go to the next slide, Michael. And in this section, we are going to be addressing 6 questions. So where will you live? What type of insurance do you have? You know, how much was covered? Is the disaster federally declared and state declared? Will there be a buyout program if it's a flood? And then what other types of resources and assistance may be available? All of these questions are vital as folks are needing to really answer that first question, where will we live? It is important for folks to consider both intermediate and long-term needs. And definitely working with a disaster case manager will help folks be aware of those available resources. So that question number 6, they need to be tied into the community. They need to be tied into those case managers and those that are in the know to become aware of what those extra resources are. When we did interviews with folks after a flood 2 years after, we heard different stories about people who were aware of resources and those who were not. So staying in the know, as Trish talked about earlier, is so vitally important. When we look at questions 3 and 4 with the federally and state declared disasters, there's resources and benefits that are available through those, through FEMA, and SBA resources. And so again, it's important to know what's out there, what's available, because that information will help folks make decisions. Let's go to the next slide here. Phyllis and I were initially working on this piece of the toolkit. We finally sat down and did a flow chart. And you'll see that this is question 1. And so there's a flow chart that walks through all 6 questions that we just looked at in a more visual manner. So, you know, where will you live? You know, determine, is my house livable? Immediately? Great. Well, maybe after some repairs, or never, or it's going to be way too long. And so it helps folks walk through each of those questions in this flow chart type of format for those of us that are more visual types of folks. Next slide, please. All right, so assessing the housing situation. And so the steps that we need to look at, again, what is our current financial situation? And we looked at that with all of the forms in the financial section. Then looking at those current housing needs and goals. Again, stepping back and thinking about what are our needs and goals? Is getting back into the home, is that best for us? Or what does that look like? What are our current housing commitments? What kind? Do I have a mortgage? How much is it? Do I have a home equity loan or a second mortgage? What other housing commitments do I have? What is it going to cost to get back into my current housing if that's what I choose to do? What will the repairs be? What will it take to haul off debris? So getting some quotes and some information on what would it cost to get back into the house for that alternative. Again, what financial resources and assistance are available, you know, including anything from volunteer rebuilds to the FEMA and SBA and all of those things. And then, again, that basic decision-making model, the housing options, what are the housing options after disaster, and listing all of those and looking at the pros and cons given all of this information that's been collected. This is really a huge decision that families need to work through. On the next slide. All right, so this just describes the boxes that we just looked at and the page numbers that go with those. But again, helping folks through that decision-making piece. We'll go to the next slide, and we're going to shift gears to the renter piece. And as the toolkit was being developed, we really went back and forth on, do we just address housing, or do we look at homeowners versus renters? And there was enough distinction between homeowners and renters that renters got their own unit. So we'll go to the next slide. But you will notice that this unit is very similar. Michael, if I can have you go to the next slide. This unit is very similar, thank you, to the homeowner section, to the homeowner unit. You know, where will you live? Contacting the landlord is so very important. What types of insurance do you have? What kind of vehicle insurance if your vehicle is damaged? Renter's insurance. Did you have renter's insurance? Folks talked about the preventative education, and I can't say enough about helping folks understand the value of renter's insurance. So very similar here. And again, the last question again, collecting information about assistance and resources, talking with people, watching for information, exploring what's out there. So very important.
If I could just ask us to pause, we had an important question coming in from Virginia Tech. This was simply that they noticed that one of the tools in the foreclosure process was really for the foreclosure process in Minnesota, and wondering how they would go about changing that, particularly for their states, since the laws differ a little bit, of course, from state to state.
Phyllis, do you want to address that, or do you want me to? All right.
I made an attempt to answer it, Celia, is that we received that, I think that document from our agency that handles the foreclosure prevention counseling, and perhaps, your similar agency might have a similar document to that.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts on that from the other colleagues on the phone?
We do suggest in the toolkit where other states can find that information. So we have national URLs, and then people can go to their specific state and they can begin to find that information about the foreclosure process in their state. We provide the Minnesota as an example to get people to think about looking in their own state. And we do provide URLs in the toolkit as how to research that.
Oh, I apologize, Julie. Yours is really more a technical question. You certainly know the process. We received it as a PDF, so we don't have it in a modifiable form because we received it in a PDF also.
Right. Okay.
This is the most active chat that I've ever experienced, so it's really fun to have this multiple dialogue going on. So
thank you for monitoring, Trish, and definitely interrupt if there's additional questions we need to address.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So Michael, let's go to the next slide. And again, this looks very similar to the homeowner piece, but again, slightly different given that renter's situation is unique and they're renters and not homeowners. So we're going to go quickly through the next few slides here. Again, the same similar types of questions and things that folks need to process. And then on the next slide, bringing it all together again with those questions and trying to figure things out. And when we're looking at the post-disaster housing commitments for renters, what does their lease say? Are there provisions in the lease about what happens if there's a disaster? Do they need to give notice? Probably. Maybe, maybe not, depending upon if they have a written lease or not and what it documents. Did they give a security deposit? When might they get that back so they can use it on their next housing commitment if that is where they are going to? Also looking at financial resources and assistance. Are there resources available for renters in the form of FEMA individual assistance, or do they qualify for SBA low interest loans? So questions for folks to ask as they are collecting information, again, in preparation for making those decisions. The next slide, please. And again, the list of questions and the corresponding page numbers in the toolkit. We'll go to the next slide, Michael. Great. This tool is just very simple. Option A, option B. You can tell we are big into providing tools for folks to collect their thoughts and their information as they are making decisions. And they can photocopy this and go in option C, option D, and so on. But again, spelling out and really writing down and thinking through what do these options really look like for us. All right, I am going to pass it on to Phyllis. Is that correct, Phyllis? And
Yes, Sarah, thank you. And Michael, I will need your assistance. And it looks like you can see me now. That's a good feeling. The eighth unit of the toolkit is getting people to think about the new normal. Now, the new normal will not happen within a week or within 2 months. It may take up to 2 years before people feel like there's a new normal. They will have done documentation and applications, identified unmet needs. They will have sought out resources and had to struggle with decisions and find help and accept it so that they can make informed decisions. They will begin to talk about BD and AD before disaster, after disaster, as they work towards a new normal. And that they will find that there are many positive aspects of the new normal. And we've listed some of them in that very short unit. And we really do assure them that life will never be quite the same, but they will be able to find a new normal. What this section also does is remind survivors that financial recovery takes time and which units to review if they're coming across roadblocks in their financial recovery. Disaster survivors said people need to know this doesn't happen overnight. This is a long journey, and that they will come to a new place, that there will be a new optimism. Next slide, please. The last unit is disaster recovery resources for families. And we currently have the list of resources for Minnesota and North Dakota families. And all of you can develop, or you may have already developed, disaster recovery resources for families. We encourage you to take a look at what we are providing, and you may want to model your list after ours. But what you need to do is really let people know where they can find your state-specific resources that will help families. Again, this is in addition to all of the resources already identified and found throughout the toolkit. Next slide, please. Here's some ways that we have let people know about the toolkit. News releases have gone out telling people how to find the online version. Flyers have been distributed to survivors. And we have pre-planned with the American Red Cross in Minnesota, and they have taken the first units through where to start and given it right to the disaster survivors in their shelters. They have reported back that that worked well. However, they are acutely aware that that may be the only time that we will be able to access disaster survivors. Many will not have a home, a phone, access to the internet, ways to get information readily. And because the toolkit is comprehensive and will be used over a long period of time, they suggest that we provide the toolkit on a jump drive, in hard copy, they say is best because the tools are right there to get started on. So talk to the voluntary organizations active in disaster. Talk to funders that may want to fund the toolkit. The American Red Cross in Minnesota is talking about having on hand 150 copies of the toolkit in each of the 17 chapter centers. And then if there's a disaster in Rochester, Minnesota, which is a pretty populated place, and there's only 150 toolkits there, easily toolkits can be transferred that are not being used from other areas in the state. So there's some thought being put into this. They can be provided through disaster case management when that gets set up. Usually disaster case management will not be set up until 5 or 6 weeks after the actual disaster. So please list your ideas in the chat box. We'd like to see your thoughts. Michael or Trish, would you like to share some of the comments?
Absolutely. One of the ones that came out, I think this might be from Louisiana, was to have it be shared with the state 211 system. So that might be something they're able to input into their database.
Good idea.
VOAD is VOAD. That may be a new acronym for you. You'd think in Extension we had all the acronyms covered, right? But Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters is truly a wonderful partner. Lori, Sarah, and Phyllis just presented at their national conference about this tool. And they really pull folks together. They are very knowledgeable about disaster response. But they're not, the area of family finance, responding to personal finance issues, that's not their thing. They're really super at muck, what I call the muck, mud, and mold time, at least in the area when it's in the water arena. But they're wonderful partners, and they're looking desperately for this kind of a resource, and we desperately need the kinds of resources they have for really immediate response to disasters.
Any other comments? I noticed that local banks, credit unions, the Minnesota Recovers website, managed by Homeland Security Emergency Management, has links to our toolkit. We also have links, other organizations, credit unions, and banks, as mentioned here. Good idea. They have linked to our toolkit and let their members know of this resource.
Barbara has a good question about insurance, and I think there's this insurance is an interesting context, because for flood, certainly in the Midwest, folks who normally don't live near a large body of water, many of the folks that we have worked with never had flood insurance. They never thought they ever needed it. So they weren't canceled. On the other hand, people who have paid off their homes, we find that people are not insured because it's not required by a mortgage, or they are way underinsured. In a recent tornado we had last year, it was, I don't remember the statistic exactly, but it was a large percentage of the people who were way underinsured. So when we think about prevention, kind of education, anything around insurance would be good. I don't know if anyone wants to share about if they're finding that people are canceled or not. That I don't know, but we just find people with flood, if you had to pick a disaster, pick one that your insurance does cover and without a rider, and flood usually isn't it.
Okay.
I'm looking here.
I'll let you look.
Questions, but I think insurance is something we can't talk enough about in a proactive mode year round with our families or news releases.
Another question that came up was about branding for their states. Is there the possibility to put their own state identity along with others? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I guess our main thing is to keep NDSU and the University of Minnesota as a source. And so you're welcome to add your own. I don't think that's an issue. We want this out as much as possible if it's helpful for you in your states. You know, that certainly people know that they're not going to call Minnesota or North Dakota for help locally. So you want to have at least some way to contact your state folks on there. Let's see. I don't know if we talked about this very much, but printed as is, either on one side or two side, it's much more useful to have tabs in it for the units and have the tabs labeled. Although I know in times of crisis, that's an extra step but it makes it much more consumable. And just so you know, sometimes the cost of, maybe the higher cost that we saw in the chat of NDSUs is simply that by adding labeled tabs, it does add an additional cost to the printing. But it makes it much more consumable.
Logistically, this is Phyllis. Logistically, we are committed to keeping the toolkit updated. There will be several things that need to be updated. So as you think about logistically how to have your constituents get the most up-to-date rendition of the toolkit, you will want to link to our website. Obviously, if you're printing it, you can put identifiers on that identify your organization. Let's move to the next slide, please. I think we've heard quite a bit about how you will use Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit. We would like to know if you want a couple of minutes to respond. Actually, we'll give you 2 minutes to respond because we do want to have an opportunity to have you fill out our webinar survey following this.
This is Trish. I think that was my cue for the link. And so, am I right, Phyllis?
Yes.
Okay, there is the link. For the, let me make sure I've got the right link here. Yeah, there's the link for the evaluation. As I say in many of the programs that I do is the cost for the program was pretty affordable, so the only charge we have for you is to please complete the evaluation so we know what went well and what you still need to know. You know, I've seen Nancy has made about sharing with FEMA. I'd like to say a thank you. On Friday, we're actually talking. Susan Shockey has been ever so kind to help set up a meeting with a representative from FEMA. So we do want to share with you that there is some national interest in that.
We would ask you please to fill out the evaluation at this time. Michael Gutter also has 3 important questions to ask us. And so you will find those questions popping up on the screen at this time. Also, a reminder while you're working on this that at 2:40, for those of you who want to know about the community-based strategy of disaster recovery resource fairs to reduce the barriers to assistance for disaster survivors, we will have a 15-minute webinar presentation, and we'll provide you with all the resources needed, including a manual of how-to, news releases, etc.
Our technical folks might be able to answer the questions around saving the chat and sending that out to participants.
Sure. Well, yes. In fact, the recording, the archive for the recording will actually be posted at the same website. There'll be a link to the archive on the same page where your bios were listed.
And the chat archive will be there as well.
It's not separated, but it's part of the file itself. So when they open it, they'll be able to see the chat archive. But so it'll open and it'll look just like this.
And it really looks like we're going to be sending out a certificate to folks of attendance so that they can request PDUs. And so we could probably put those links in that website as well, or in that email as well.
Please feel free to contact us if you have further questions regarding both the toolkit and money management in times of disaster. Lori has provided in the chat box the survey for this particular webinar. We would also like to thank our moderator, Michael Gutter, and all the staff at the technology at Iowa State University Extension who has made this possible. Additionally, we're going to put up a slide here. There will be another webinar, and you can invite all of your partners to attend this webinar. The webinar today was primarily for extension educators, extension staff from across the nation. But if we can get Michael to close out the polls, and we can advance to the slide that shows how to access this webinar. And we would like you to invite on June 23rd your partners to also learn about the toolkit. The more partners that we have that know about the toolkit, the more probability that these tools will become available for disaster survivors. We will be advertising or promoting this upcoming via extension and also through Eden and the voluntary organizations active in disaster through the National VOAD. If you notice also we have case studies that are available. Sarah, would you like to talk about that?
Oh, thank you, Phyllis. Yes, when we first pulled together the toolkit and we did a training for educators in Minnesota and North Dakota, we developed some case studies similar to the younger family, which appear in the manual, but we have some additional toolkits that are available, and I believe they will be Yes, there is a URL on the slide, but they are really great for working with case managers, educators, others who will be working with families, and it allows them an opportunity to look at a family through the toolkit and see what it would be like for those families. And we have several different family makeups. We have Joe Singleton, who is a single guy, and his situation is a little bit different than Mr. and Mrs. Older, who are an older family. And then we had an individual who is a 62-year-old retired teacher, and husband passed away, and again her situation is different as a single elderly person. And then we had two more, Mr. and Mrs. Empty Nesters. So
I'm going to just pop it in the, I'm going to see if it takes me there or not.
yep, so the empty nester family again, so what does it look like when it's a younger couple but their kids are out of the house? And so the case studies are great for digging into the toolkits and figuring out how to best use it.
I see several messages about getting updates. Updates will be, the toolkit will be kept updated online at the URL address you have been provided. You don't need to have updates emailed to you. It will be kept
Oh, just in the chat.
today. In about 7 minutes, we will start the Disaster Recovery Resource Fair strategies to help those affected by a disaster to actually access the assistance programs that they need, a community strategy.